Let's talk about the keyframe animation. To do that, like always, jump into an empty scene and let's change it to our logic view. You can find the keyframe animation in the toolbox under the animation category. And down here you have the keyframe animation. Let's drag and drop that into our content editor. And as you can see, when we just bring it in as an empty keyframe animation, we don't have a lot of properties. We have only one control property and we don't have any outputs. So what I want to do, I want to animate a simple rectangle which can go from the left to the center, from the center to the right, and back to the right. So basically 3 positions, and I want to be able to control that rectangle to go from each of the 3 positions to any position. Okay, so to do that, we simply bring in here axis and a rectangle. Let's make that rectangle a bit larger. To bind properties to your keyframe animation, you simply bring in your axis into the content editor, and then you simply drag and drop the value you want to animate. So what I want to do, I simply want to say that rectangle can move from the left side to the center to the right and so on. Yeah, basically from each position, from each of the 3 positions to all. So to do that, I only have to animate one value, and that's our X value. So to animate value, you simply drag and drop that value over the keyframe animation. If you have multiple properties to animate, you also can press and hold Control and simply click on the values you want to animate. Okay. To have control about this animation now, we have to switch to our animation view because we want to have here our animation editor, okay? And as you can see down here already, all that bindings I made are now here in our keyframe editor. If I want to delete some bindings, I simply select it and press delete and confirm it here, right? So like I said, I actually only need my position X. So let's delete all the others, right? And now, before we start to create some keyframes, let me quickly explain here that menu of our keyframe editor. Over here, we have that drop down where we can switch to all the animations in the scene, right? So I have here my animation 1 now. And as you can see, every Ventuz scene has also a built-in animation, and that's that main animation. You can also use that if you want, but my personal preference is I always use my own animations, right? So let's select that animation. Over here, we can switch to different views, to our time view, to our diagram view, to our logic view and data view. We will talk about this view, and the logic view today. Then over here, you can change basically the time, right? By default, your timeline down here will have a absolute value 0, 1, 2, and so on, right? You can run your animation here. You can also start your animation with the space bar and stop it, right? And you also can switch basically the time over here. So you can switch it to seconds, you can switch it to frames, whatever you like. So I prefer that second view. And as you can see, if I zoom out and zoom in with my middle mouse wheel, then we can see here we have 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and so on, right? If you press and hold your middle mouse button, then you can move this timeline, okay? Down here, we can create slices. With this orange button, we can add keyframes. And here with that blue button, we can basically create states. And that states we will talk about very soon. So let's start with the keyframes first. So make sure that red bar is on the very beginning on 0 seconds, right? And then we simply create a keyframe here, okay? And then we move that maybe here to the left, right? As you can see, if I select it, if I move my red bar over, then that color will change, and then you're able to change that values here. Let's -17 is nice. Then after a second, I create another keyframe, and this should be 0. That should be in the center. After another second, I create another keyframe with my insert key on the keyboard. That's a shortcut to add a keyframe. I make that 17, right? And now we have already, if I play this with spacebar, then we have already here our nice little keyframe animation. Very simple one, but it's a keyframe animation. So before we go to the logic, let's jump quickly to our diagram view. In this diagram view, you can have this also a representation of this value based on time and value, okay? So you also can zoom out with your middle mouse wheel. If you press and hold shift, then you can scale it in the Y direction. If you press and hold control, then you can scale it into the X direction, right? Let's bring that back now and let's zoom it out. In case something like this happens now, then you are also able to bring that back here with this little button to zoom everything into view, right? So I want to have it maybe a bit smaller and a little bit like that. If I select the keyframe here now, then I have access to my spline handles, right? If I move them around, then you can see the time, the acceleration, deceleration will change. You can make here super nice little adjustments, right? If you press and hold Control, then you will lock that handle into the horizontal direction, right? You're also able to select all the keyframes. To do that, you have to press and hold Shift and then the left mouse button, and then you can create that rectangle and select all the keyframes together. And as you can see, you have here now a reset button to bring them all back to default. You can make it linear, right? So if we have it linear, then there will be no acceleration or deceleration. You have here, you can change it to jump. You also can change it here to that elastic or to that bounce, right? So this will look like this now. And for that last two function, you have access to the behavior of that spline, right, with these two values, right? Well, let's try this one. Oh, now it's jumping a little bit. So as you can see, you really can do pretty cool stuff here with that diagram view. But let's reset them out back to normal and let's make it to spline back to normal. And I think this is exactly what I want to have. So I'm happy with that. So let's talk about some logic now. To create some logic, we can go back here to our time view. And let's create states now. To create states, we simply bring our red bar to wherever we want to create a state. So I want to create three states, that the left state, the center state, and the right state. To do that, we start with the left state, and I simply click here this little blue drop down, and then I select new state. The shortcut for a new state is also S on the keyboard. I create a second state in the center, and on the right side, a third state. So once we did that, we can jump here to our logic view. And now you can see Ventuz created here our nice little representation of our three states, right? So if we double click, the animation will jump directly to that position. So we have our left state, our center state, our right state. I also want to rename them. So double click here and I double click here on that. This is left. This here is my center. And this here is my right state. These little guys are a representation of our default methods in our keyframe animation. If we select here our keyframe animation, we can see we have now much more input and output properties, right? So once we create some logic, once we create some states, the keyframe animation will also change here that icon from that black play button to that to this icon basically. And that means there is some logic in this keyframe animation already. Okay, so as you can see down here, we have now that methods, and they are also a representation of these methods over here. So we are on the left side. If I press now my next, then the animation will run from the left side to the center. When I'm at the center and I press next, the animation will run to the right. So to show you that, next, next. And when I'm on the right side, I only have one option to go from right back to the center with my orange method, basically with that previous, right? But I also want to be able to go from right side directly to the left. So to do that, I basically have to create one more binding. To do that, I simply right click and drag and drop a new binding from left to right. And as you can see, Ventuz also created here now a new slice basically, because if we jump back to our time view, you can see when we created our keyframes before, right, we only defined go from left to the center to the right, but we did not make any definition how to go from the right side to the left side. Yeah? So that's why basically Ventuz automatically created a new state to define left to right. Yeah, the values are clear. Ventuz knows already. Left we defined in our first one. Left is here -17 and right is 17, right? So Ventuz simply created a new slice, which we also can adjust if we want. But for this case, I'm happy with that. So let's jump back to our logic view. Next thing what we have to do, I want to create our customized methods. To create customized methods, I simply click here this button methods, and then I create my three new customized methods. So I call them to center. The other one we call to right. And the last one we call to left. Now the last thing I have to do, I simply have to drag and drop my customized methods to the right positions down here in my logic view, right? So from the center, I want to go to the right, right? So let's start maybe with the to center method. So with the to center method, I want to be able to go from the right to center, and I want to be able to go from left to the center over this direction. So let's do that. To the center, from right to center, from the left, from here to center. As you can see, by accident I dragged and dropped now that method into this state. So if you want to delete that, then you simply select the state, and then you can see here the rule always to center. I don't want to have that, so I simply reset it out, and now it's done, right? So then let's go on with our other two customized method. I want to be able to go to the right from the center to the right. From here, I want to go to the right, and I also want to be able to go from the left directly to the right, okay? And our last method, I want to be able to go to the left from center to left over this direction, and from center to left, sorry, from right to left over this direction. And as you can see, now we defined all our possibilities, okay? So let's test this. If I press to center, then my animation will go to the center. If I go to the right, my animation will go to the right. If I'm on the right and I want to go to the left, then my animation will go directly to the left. Okay. So this is a very simple logic. And of course, now you can imagine, or you can exercise by yourself to create very complex logics. Yeah. So you can imagine if you want to have all connections with 4, 5, 6, 10 different states, then you have a lot of bindings. Then you have to create also a lot of much more methods. Now I want to show you also another way how you can use keyframe animations. To do that, I simply delete this guy, and let's create a very simple axis and a rectangle. Maybe I scaled it a bit up. And now I simply create an animation, a keyframe animation, and I bind here my X value to my keyframe animation. Then down here in my timeline view, I make a very simple animation. Let's create a keyframe with insert key, and let's say I want to start that animation here. -20 is good, and after, let's change the time here as well to second, and after let's zoom out, after 1 second I want that this keyframe animation is on the right side, and let's create another keyframe here, right? So now we have a very simple animation. Okay, what I want to show you basically now is how to utilize this control property. Okay, so the cool thing is in Ventuz you can control multiple animations from one animations. Okay, so to do that I first create a container out of that just to make it a bit more clear. Let's call that 01. Let's also make it an interface just to be safe, and let's jump back in because I want to expose basically here my control for my animation. Okay, so now let's jump out, and now you can see I have my control exposed. Okay, so before I actually can bind another animation to this control, I need to have a little bit logic in this animation. Okay, to get this logic I have to create a state, or actually two states. So I can simply create a state here, S1 and S2 here at the end, and that's basically it. And with this I'm now able to connect that control from my animation to another animation. Okay, so let's do that. I have only one here, and I create another keyframe animation outside, and let's call that master. Okay, and now you can see I simply drag and drop my control from my nested animation here inside that container to my master animation. And down here in our master animation, you can see now we have access to this control, right? So if I create a keyframe here, then you can see we have here we can change the values. We can select state, or we can select the connection, and that's exactly what I want to do. I want to use now my connection S1 to S2, right? But to do that, I also have to create another keyframe, right? So by default, this is now only state 1, right? And you remember state 1 in my inside keyframe animation is just at -19 or -20 position, right? If I double click here, I also can change that from state to connection from S1 to S2. And now you can see that green means there is animation. Okay, so and if I run my master animation, then this will actually trigger my inside animation. Okay, if I make this longer, let's say 3 seconds, then it also will take that 3 seconds to run my inside animation. And of course, now we can do some cool stuff. Maybe let's do it again. 1 second is good. What I want to do now, I simply want to copy this guy a couple of times. And again, so now we have 3 master animations. I don't want to have this 2, so let's delete them because I want to connect animation 2 and 3 also here to my master. And now you can see I do exactly the same. Let's create a keyframe here. Let's create a keyframe here. And let's change this guy connection S1 to S2 and this guy also connection S1 to S2. And the last thing what I want to do, I want to offset this 3 guys a little bit from each other that we also can see what's happening. Maybe let's do it like this. And let's move that as well 2 steps over here. And if I run this guy now, then you can see we have this nice little offsetted animation of our 3 containers. And of course, even here, you are able now to create states, right? So to do that, you simply click here again. What I also want to show you quickly here, the difference between a state and a soft state. So let's say I create a state here now, then you can see Ventuz automatically creates keyframes, right? So let's delete that state again, and let's also delete this keyframe and this keyframe. And now I create a soft state. As you can see, if I create a soft state, this soft state is not bound to keyframes. Yeah? And that's exactly the difference between a state and a soft state. So a normal state is always bound to keyframes. Okay, let me quickly show you that again. Let's also quickly delete that other guys here in the logic view. That's okay. And back here in our time view, if I create now a normal state with S, then you can see Ventuz creates these new keyframes. If I move this state now, then you can see also that keyframes are moving within my animation, right? Let's say we create another state here, but that state I want to have a little bit more flexible, right? Not bound to keyframes. So let's make that a soft state. And now our soft state is here. And as you can see, if I move that soft state, then it's not bound to our keyframes.